to Dr. Abubakar and then take his perspective on the general agriculture sector, considering the immense expertise that he has in this particular area. Dr. Abubakar.
Thank you very much. I was hoping to wait until the end to give my comments. But be that as it may, my first question was, where is MOFA? And I looked across and I saw Anthony Morrison sitting there, and I said, you're responsible for MOFA not coming because they're afraid of what you're going to tell them. But the truth of the matter is that the impact of going to IMF has a direct and indirect impacts. And the indirect impacts are to create an enabling environment. But of course we know for increased investment, of course we know that the direct increased investment comes from private sector and banks. So simply going to the IMF does not guarantee that there will be the corresponding investment that will come from the private sector, because there are many other factors in between. So I think we need to get that very clear. It's not like you're going from the IMF to borrow a huge amount of money which you're going to give directly to farmers. You're going to maybe improve extension, improve roads, etc. But that doesn't lead directly to investment in agriculture, although it enables agriculture. So I think we need to be very clear about that. So the second issue then is that if this is the case, then our question should be whether IMF can restore or the IMF program can restore the conducive environment for investment. If so, how long will it take? Short, medium, or long term? And if it is medium to long term, what happens in between to the agriculture sector investment? The other question then is that, of course, how much of what we think is going to happen, even from the enabling environment, is just our wishful thinking, and how much is reality? From the track record of previous investments, has what we thought would happen actually happened? And if it has not happened 16 times, why do you think it will happen the 17th time? And it may be that some of those decisions are not related to just creating the conducive environment from IMF programs, but more on the issue of we ourselves setting a different path for our economy by creating even a different architecture for our economy, recognizing where we are and where our comparative advantages can be turned into competitive advantages. On that score, then, we have to ask, what are the critical prohibitive factors for investment? And these will come to transaction costs. Really, when you talk about the enabling environment, infrastructure, all those things come down to transaction costs. And the question is, what is the IMF, 17th IMF program, going to do to transaction costs materially that the other 16 programs have not? Is it going to result in reduced interest rates, cost of capital? Let's not even say interest rates, cost of capital. Is it going to result in reduced fuel transaction costs or fuel costs for agriculture? Is it going to result in a changed composition of fossil fuel and renewable energy, where we may get cheaper renewable energy for agriculture? Just this week, I saw an article of 13.4 megawatt plant solar power commissioned at Kaleo in Upper West region. So I called my contact there. I said, oh, this is good news. Will that mean you will get cheaper energy for irrigation? He says, oh, no. The whole thing is being managed by VRA, and they're going to put the power onto the grid, and it will come at the same rates. Then what are we talking about when we're talking about diversifying into renewable energy? We thought the whole idea was that areas which were off-grid will get the solar power, and that will go into renewable energies being used for production, irrigation, agriculture over a long term, and then you pay it off. Yeah. Then that way it has a direct impact. But if it is simply to put the power onto the main grid and charge it at the same rates, then what impact does it have? Maybe it just looks good for climate agriculture that we have some amount of energy coming from solar power, but does it actually affect transaction costs? So I think the other aspect of it is trade policy. Whenever you talk about agriculture and you don't talk about trade policy, I get upset because it is one of the critical constraints. We talk about purchasing power of the urban versus rural areas. We know that the purchasing power in urban areas is higher than in rural areas. That is why they're able to buy the imported goods. And they are the first point of call for imported goods which compete with domestic goods for agriculture. So if the purchasing power is there, but it is being, serviced by imports, then how do you expect the increased transaction costs from rural areas to come and catch up with it? Transaction costs.
Okay.
So I think this goes to the question of your snail person who says he's got demand and yet he cannot expand. Right? Don't get that. Is there a market failure somewhere in the system? If so, where is it? Is it that if you were to enter the domain of taking credit for expanding his production, he would soon get into trouble, and therefore he doesn't do it? That's a good question. Is it that, he may be at the current level where he's operating, he may be able to piggyback on low cost of transportation, but if he were to expand and have to get his own vehicle to move that, he would have to bear the full cost of transport costs, and that would then make it uncompetitive. So I think these are the areas that we must look at, because fundamentally, this is where it boils down to.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad that you raised the issue of the gentleman doing the snails and the ability to expand. What should we expect the impact of this IMF to have on agriculture?
Thank you. I'll deal with that one issue first, which I think summarizes the issue of expenditure and revenue. IMF is concerned about expenditure and revenue. In that box called expenditure, what are you going to do to reduce your expenditure? And in that box called revenue, what are you going to do to increase your revenue? Part of that is what we're talking about on the agriculture side. But controlling these two boxes, of course, is our politics. When you have a short-term tenure of government, which is based on campaign promises, definitely, as much as you refuse to do it, it will happen. So we have to look at the bigger picture and examine even what kind of democracy we have and what tenures of office, maybe longer term, so that we have about 5-6 years for development, instead of having 2 years either side and only 2 years for actual development. That's one thing. Inside that box, the things you're going to do to increase production must be anchored on irrigation. The question that we keep talking about Burkina is, look at the irrigated land in Burkina and look at the irrigated land in Ghana. They have much more irrigated land than us, and that is why 6 months of the year they're not sitting down doing nothing. Half the country, 6 months of the year, is sitting down doing nothing. And they have 4 rivers that flow through it: Dakar, Black Volta, White Volta, Oti. You couldn't space them better. If we use those rivers during the 6 months that we did nothing, we can easily add another 25% on our GDP. If we anchor our strategy of going to the IMF on that productivity growth, then we will have a solution, we will have a way out. If we don't, then we'll keep going back there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Abubakar. Let me just, on behalf of GIZ and IMANI, say a big thank you to Joy News for covering this live for everybody. I'm going to go to Mr. Kubo in case I did that acknowledgement, in case we go...